Good evening, everyone. And tonight we will be delving into Pesher Habakkuk. Pesher Habakkuk is one of the Pesharim. The Pesharim are, Pesher is a form of commentary that was specific to the Qumran community. We don't have it from anywhere else. Does that mean no one else did it? No, it doesn't, because remember that when we talk about Second Temple literature, what has survived is spotty, particularly when you come to these things, which if any other group used a form similar to the Pesher, one assumes they would have used it for their group as well, the same way that, or perhaps for eschatological prophecies, but it would have been somewhat unusual and would have been probably specific to that group. It wouldn't have become, it probably wouldn't have become mainstream, even though you can imagine if you're doing it, you could use that form to be a little bit more mainstream if you're using it for more eschatological interpretation. So Pesher Habakkuk, what's interesting about Pesher Habakkuk and Pesher Nahum that we're also going to be looking at probably in our next class is how much we learn about the community and the community's relationships and how they saw other groups. Okay, we see that very much in Pesher Nahum. We see it in Pesher Habakkuk as well. And that's because the way they were using this type of interpretation is they were using it they use the prophetic, the book of the prophet as a, they're saying this prophecy was actually about us in the future, about us in the past. This is about what happened last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. So that's how they're reading these prophecies. I'm going to just, if there are any questions or comments, please let me know. Oh, I see there's something in the chat. Hold on. Susan asks why the word Pesher instead of Perush. They use the word Pesher, as we will see. They say Pishro, they quote the pasuk, they quote the verse, and then they say, and its interpretation, Psharo, right? So they use the word Pesher, right? So that's why we use the word Pesher and not Perush. And this also allows us to distinguish between what we would normally consider an interpretation. Normally, when we, particularly in the Jewish tradition, consider interpretation, it's what does the verse mean in its context? Now, prophecies, it's true, we have a long tradition of interpreting prophecies not as speaking to the generation of the prophet, but rather as speaking to a future generation. So when you're talking about prophecies, this isn't as big a leap as if they were, let's say, reading Bereshit, the book of Genesis, as if it were talking about them. That they're not doing. It's less of a leap for them to do that with the book of prophecy because it's supposed to be prophecy. So they're just saying it's prophecy about them, right? At the same time, the Pesher is unique in the way it uses these verses. So I'm going to share my screen. Yes?
Did they use Pesher to mean Perush, or does it actually mean something different?
They seem to, they mean it pretty much as its interpretation. You could say that you could if you want to, you can interpret it as its solution, right? Almost like it's like this is the true meaning of it, right? But yeah, they're using it pretty much to mean its interpretation. All right, so here on the right we have Pesher Habakkuk. This is just the wiki text that I put up here. Here on the left we see this is Bilha Nitzan's commentary from outside the Bible. So Bilha Nitzan is actually known for her. She worked on Pesher Habakkuk originally. Now we're going to kind of quickly, we're almost pretty much skip over this first section, and if you look, it's a little bit clearer in the Hebrew, but you can see on the left in the English as well that it's almost completely restored. The first column here, there's not a lot left. And it's almost completely restored based on the width of other columns. So let's just kind of go through this and go to where we can actually read unique material, okay? So here we have, let's go, this is a little bit strange. Okay, so let's, excuse me. Let's go to actually Habakkuk, right? So right now, the verse that we are interpreting, so it's 1:5 Aleph Hey, okay? Ra'u v'goyim v'habitu v'hitamu timahu ki fo'al po'el b'mechem lo taminu kusapar, right? Look among the nations. This is a pretty good translation. Look among the nations, be amazed, because I will be doing something. A thing will be done in your days that you will not believe when it is told. Okay. Now it's interesting that here already it's being interpreted as, look, oh traitors. Okay, as if it says Re'u vogdim v'habitu. In other words, it's reading the verse differently than the verse we have in the Masoretic text. And we see this a lot. We see this in several places in Pesher Habakkuk. And the question always is, when we see this, are they doing it on purpose or do they have a different text? Okay. So here they're reading it as Re'u vogdim v'habitu, see traitors, right? And who are they talking about? And this is we realize this is restored. We're assuming this is what they're reading. Okay. So what is the interpretation of the passage? It's going to be a lot of flipping around here. Oh, see, here it says uvogdim. Here it's outside of the brackets. Okay.
About the word, we were asked about the word, why is it pesher and not perush?
Yeah.
So in the Bible, like I think it's not the same thing. It's, as you said, like
well, it's like patal. If we think about, I mean, if you want to think about pesher in terms of the meaning of the word, the cognate is that we would be used to is patal, right? It's that pay tough resh pesher. That's the connection. That's the word that it's connected to. It doesn't mean, right? But Ida, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I want to say that in the Bible, like it says, it used the word pesher as a solution to dreams. Like it's used for dreams. Like for example, I just looked it up. In Daniel, וידברו הכסדים למלך ארמית מלכה להלמין, חיי אמר חילמה לעבדך ופישרה נחווה. We will find you the pesher, which is a pitaron, like you said. And it's in other places in Daniel. Or Daniel. Okay, especially Daniel.
Yes. So that right. And that's what I meant when I said, like, we can frequently, when you'll see it in English, it will say its interpretation. So like that's the translation here is its interpretation. It's closest when we read it in the, and thank you, Ido, when we read it in the Pesher, the closest meaning is interpretation. It's coming from this background of it being something that's solved, like a puzzle that's solved, right? And it is closer to what you would think of as a dream interpretation, is that certain things symbolize other things. So here, Bishro al Risha'im uvogdim im ish hakazav. What is this talking about? What is this verse talking about? It's talking about the traitors who, together with ish hakazav, with the man of the lie. Man of the lie is generally considered to be a leader of possibly Prushim, Pharisees. We could say Pharisees, Prushim, who opposed the Moreh HaTzedek, the teacher of righteousness. Okay. So there were traitors with him. Ki lo ha'eminu et asher siper Moreh HaTzedek mipi el va'al habogdim b'chukei el u'b'brit ha'chadasha ki lo ha'eminu b'brit el. Okay, so this was talking about the traitors together with the man of the lie, for they did not listen to the words of the teacher of righteousness, which were from the mouth of God. And it concerns the traitors of the new covenant, for they were not faithful to the covenant of God. Now, here we have this idea again that there was revelation given to the teacher of righteousness, and those people who didn't believe him are traitors. Okay. And we can hear now that there was a conflict between a leader of, again, we're assuming the Prushim, the Pharisees, or I hate just using Pharisees and Prushim interchangeably, but I don't really have much of a choice here. And and the leader of the community, the teacher of righteousness. Okay. And the conflict that they experienced, that these people didn't believe him, because, and that's something we see in different forms in different sectarian documents about how it's kind of painful for them that no one believes that what they're doing is the right thing. Okay. So let's continue on here. They are the ruthless ones, the covenant. Yes.
So
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You're not coming through clearly. I can't hear what you're saying.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
So the traitors refer specifically to the Prushim?
It's not clear that the traitors are specifically the Prushim. They're listening to the man of lies. So it could be because there is a elsewhere where it says that here in the continuation where it implies that that these guys can eventually come back, right? There's another place where the traitors are members of the sect. Okay, that's when they're called the house of Avshalom. All right, so there are different conflicts that are being described in this scroll.
You mean members of the Qumran sect?
I mean members of the Qumran sect, yes. So there are different groups. The different groups you read about in Pesher Habakkuk. You have the man of the lie and the traitors who follow the man of the lie. There's the wicked priest, who is a ruler who's probably a Hasmonean ruler, who's also a priest, right? Who's also like, as was common with the Hasmonean rulers, right? You have you have also the Kitiim, the Romans, who are referred to specifically here. And you also have the house of Avshalom, which is apparently a group within the sect that broke off. Okay. Now in Pesher Nahum, it talks about specifically the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Prushim and the Tzdokim, right? Giving them Menashe and Ephraim, right? Giving them specifically names there. That's in Pesher Nahum. Here, it's speaking more. It tends to speak a little bit more about individuals in these groups that I just mentioned. Moshe Matityahu says, why should Pharisees and Prushim not be used interchangeably? The only reason is because the word Pharisees is so loaded in Christianity that I don't like using it when I don't want to load it, and I never want to load it that way. So that's really the only reason. But the fact is that's who we're talking about, right? Let me go back into my into our text. Okay. So when we have, so again, so if we look at how are we using the verse, right? Let's go back to the verse and see how it's interpreting the verse, right? So if it's reading it, Uvogdim v'habitu, look, traitors, and be amazed because you won't believe it when it's told. What they're not, the plain meaning of the verse is there's going to be something so amazing that you wouldn't even believe it, right? What they're interpreting it is there were actually people who didn't believe something that they were told that was true, right? And those people are these people who followed the man of the lie, who believed the leader of the Pharisees and were not faithful to the covenant. That covenant being what the Qumran community thinks is the real law. Am I sharing my screen? You guys see it? Okay, good. All right. And also, and it's another, and now that we're going to interpret it. Moreover, likewise, the interpretation of the passage concerns the traitors at the end of days. So we're going to have a dual interpretation here. We don't need to just have one, right? The other interpretation of this verse is that these are the people who won't believe what's happening in the last generation from the mouth of the priest to whom God gave into his heart. So let's go back to, let's look at the Hebrew text. All right. Hador acharon mipi hakohen asher natan el bnei Yisrael Torah lifshor et kol divrei avadav haneviim. What won't they believe? They won't believe the Kohen, and here we might still be talking about the teacher of righteousness, right? The priest, that God actually revealed to him the words of his servants, the prophets. In other words, what the Pesher itself. Let me go back to these words. Livshor et kol divrei avadav. They're not going to believe the Kohen, and again, we're probably talking about the teacher of righteousness. They're not going, but perhaps it's another generation of leader who is going to interpret by means of this Pesher. They're going to interpret the words of the prophets. They're not going to believe all these Pesher, this Pesher, they're not going to believe. In other words, they're not going to believe this leader who is saying this is what the prophets were really talking about. They're not going to believe what he interprets about the end of days, right? So they're not, on the one hand, they're not believing. They're going to believe the man of the lie against the teacher of righteousness, and also we're talking about the generation of people who don't believe in what's foretold by the prophets as interpreted by the leader of the sect. Okay. And here we come to what we were reading before. I have to find the Ki hineni mekim et hakasdim hagoy hamar v'hanimhar. All right, this is a quote from Habakkuk. In Habakkuk, what is the thing that people won't believe? This horrible nation of the Kittayim who are going to just take over. In Habakkuk, the Kittayim are who? The Babylonians, right? Here, the Kittayim are the Romans, right? So here, and in fact, the Qumran community uses the word Kittayim for Romans because it must be talking about the Romans here. All right. So, or I shouldn't say that. I should say it's not talking about the Kittayim. It says in the verse, it says Kasdim, the Chaldeans, HaKasdim, speaking about the Babylonians, right? And in Pesher Habakkuk, it's automatically interpreted as the Kittayim, the Romans. Okay, so its interpretation concerns the Kittayim, who are swift and strong in battle, so as to destroy many who will fight against the dominion of the Kittayim, and the wicked ones that will betray the covenant. This part is restored and will not be faithful to the statutes of God. So in other words, we have that lumping together of the Romans and the unfaithful Jews. Okay, we have a similar lumping together in the War Scroll, right? Where the bad guys include both foreign nations, foreign enemy nations, and those Jews who are not, who don't accept, right, the right way, as it were. Okay, so let's move on a little bit more quickly because we're not going to be able to do the whole scroll. I will mention, so if you see here on the right here, it says 1QP Hab. Okay, so the P is for Pesher, Hab is for Habakkuk, right? The 1 is the cave. It's from cave 1 at Qumran. All right. So in general, it's anything from cave 1. In general, things in cave 1 were especially preserved. And I do frequently think of it as if it was in cave 1, they felt it was really important. Someone said, we got to preserve this and not just read it. So let's move along and see some of the more interesting pieces. A lot of these are a lot of this stuff, by the way, as you can see, is about the Romans. They laugh at every fortress and they heap up earth to capture it. And again, it's interpreting something that's about the Babylonians. So it's not strange that they would go to the Romans, but you see that they're very, very aware of this threat of the Romans, right? That the Qumran community is very aware that the Romans are kind of hanging over everything, that they're a threat and that they really may take over. Okay, moving right along. I'm juggling different texts here, so bear with me. Okay, so in the Habakkuk text, we're going back to Habakkuk. So what we're doing here is we're looking at the biblical verse, we're looking at and then we're looking at how they're interpreting it. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
what's puzzle? Yes.
Feeling like the Romans are a threat, that seems like it would be relatively late in the
Look,
time
this
period.
is it's copied in a Herodian script, right? So that would make it relatively late, right? So I mean, the copy is late. Put it that way. The copy is late.
Interpretation itself seems like it would be fairly late.
Yeah, yes. I would think my interpretation would be the Romans are so prominent in this scroll, I would put it as relatively late, right? The copy is from the second half of the 1st century. So we're talking late. Of 1st century, must be BC, no? I guess not, it's Herodian. So it's pretty late. It's pretty late. That doesn't mean, now we always have to be careful when we date it from the copy. It's just a copy. This just means when they copied it down. So we don't really know when it was written, but it couldn't have been, but put it that way. Like it could be like it's not clear, is the wicked priest like Alexandriana, like who is it exactly? But it could be relatively late, and it should be late enough where the Romans are a threat. It wouldn't be the beginning of the Hasmonean dynasty, right? So let me okay, so here, okay, let me go. Okay, now also here, so now it's interpreting what I wanted to read here, and what's here on the left. You see section 6. Lama tabit gubogdim tacharish b'vala rasha tzadik mimenu. Okay. Why do you look upon the treacherous? Are you quiet when the evil swallows the more righteous? This is Habakkuk's calling out to God against, why are you letting wicked people prevail over righteous people? This is pretty much the one place actually we see in biblical prophecy where the prophet really says to God, hey, the wicked are prospering and the righteous are failing. How can you possibly allow this, right? This is something special about the book of Habakkuk in general. So let's see how they interpret it. Why do you heed traitors but are silent when a wicked one swallows up one more righteous? Its interpretation concerns the house of Avshalom and the men of their council, who were silent at the rebuke of the teacher of righteousness and did not support him against the man of the lie, who rejected the law in the midst of all their counsel. Okay, so what we're seeing here seems to be let me find it in here. Now I want to also point out something to you in the Hebrew. On the right here, you see where it says vakat. Okay, it's very clearly, as opposed to when we were looking at rewritten Bible, it's very clearly dividing between the verse and the interpretation. This was the verse. Now we have a space. Now we say its interpretation is about, right? So it's a very clear recognition of, this is the biblical text. This is what we're interpreting. All right. Pishro al beit Avshalom v'anshe atatam asher ninmu b'tochachat morat tzedek v'lo azruhu al isha chazav. Right. Asher ma'as et Torah b'toch kol atatam. All right. So it means
Miriam,
the house of Avshalom. Yeah.
So the vakat is a physical space between.
Yes,
words?
the vakat is always a physical space. Yeah. No one wrote vakat, that they left a space. So whenever you see the vakat, it always means a physical space. Now, you also see that here, for example, there's a physical space in the middle of the interpretation, right? But it is important sometimes, frequently, this is, a vakat is frequently the only divider that you're going to get in these texts, is in like a space, right? If you think about a Tanakh or a Torah, right, when you have, those are the dividers. There are no pasuk, there are no verse dividers. The only dividers are spaces that are left at the end of a paragraph, whether it's a full line or whether it's a part of a line. It's the same way when we're looking at these texts.
But vakat specifically does not mean a missing piece of parchment from
No. A vakat means a purposefully left space. That is a vakat. Okay, and that's why it's noted in the thing. When there's a space, when there's something that's fragmented, you see these dots and the bracket. Well, this whole thing is missing, right? They have no idea what there is here. They put these things because they know that there's space right? They know how wide the column's supposed to be. But they will indicate when something's missing, they'll usually indicate it with brackets. Okay, if it says vakat, that means someone left a space on purpose. So its interpretation again concerns the house of Avshalom. So the house of Avshalom, apparently, like Avshalom betrayed David HaMelech, betrayed King David. So Absalom betrayed King David. The house of Avshalom is symbolizing a group in the sect that betrayed the sect, right? They were silent at the rebuke of the teacher of righteousness and did not support him against the man of the lie, who rejected the law in the midst of all their counsel. What was this council? What was this meeting? We don't know. It sounds like there was some larger council, right, where there was a debate of some kind, and this group that they expected to support them did not and betrayed them from inside, like Avshalom. Okay, now of course this is a lot of interpretation, but it seems reasonable because otherwise they would just call them followers of the man of the lie. These guys are not supposed to be followers of the man of the lie. These guys betrayed from within. Let's move on to one of the more famous sections of this we read last time, but let's look at this again. So this is in and God told Habakkuk to write down the things that are going to come upon the last generation. And here we are. Vaya'aneni Adonai vayomer ktov chazon uva'er ahaluchot leman yarutz korebo. The actual verse is God answered me and said, write down the vision and write it clearly on tablets so that it can be, so that the person who's reading it can run, means the person who reads it can read it easily, right? For there is yet a prophecy, a truthful, this is actually nice because we didn't know about this until we discovered Ugaritic. So we just would say it will breathe, like it will, we knew that would mean to testify to the future, and it will not disappoint, it will not lie, and if it tarries, wait for it, because it will come, it will not delay. Now, where do we have v'yafech? V'yafech, normally we think to blow, to breathe. Actually, yapihu or yapich in Ugaritic is a witness. We know because you would have them signature. You would have like yapichu, witness, and then their signature. So yapich, and yapichu, the u is just a case ending. So it's yapich. That's the root. Yafech means to witness, to testify, right? That's why we have yafech kazav, right? Yafech actually means to testify. We know it from the cognate in Ugaritic for witness. And that's what's going on here. But if we go back to our Pesher Habakkuk, God told Habakkuk to write down the things that are going to come upon the last generation, the fulfillment of the end time he did not make known to him. In other words, Habakkuk says God told Habakkuk to write these things, right? But he didn't tell him when it was going to come. And when he says so that he can run who reads it, Leman Yarut Korebo, it's talking about a specific reader. It's talking about the teacher of righteousness. It's not just saying, oh, so anyone can read it easily. It's talking about a reader, a specific reader, and that's the teacher of righteousness, to whom God made known all the mysteries of the words of his servants, the prophets. Let us continue. And again, when we're talking about if it tarries, wait for it will surely come, its interpretation concerns the men of truth. In other words, the members of the community, those who observe the Torah, whose hands do not grow slack in the service of the truth, when the last period is drawn out for them. For all of God's periods will come according to their fixed order as he decreed for them in the mysteries of his prudence. Prudence being what? Let's see. It's line 14. Say line 14. Razeh or mato. In kind of in the secret, in the mysteries of his kind of wisdom, you could say. I wouldn't say prudence, but and then when we have Hine upla lo yushra, right? Behold, his soul is I wouldn't even say heedless. It's whatever. It's not right, right? It's not upright. Its interpretation is that their sins will be doubled upon them. They will not find favor of the judgment. So again, we have here, it's very clear, those who observe the Torah in the house of Yehuda, right? Whom God will save from the house of judgment on account of their tribulation and their fidelity to the teacher of righteousness. This is the community. The community says, we are the house of Yehuda, we are being faithful, and we will be saved. Now let's go on a little bit and see. This is where we learn, again, through this interpretation, we learn a lot about the community and how they saw themselves and how they saw others. Okay, so for example, if we look at Habakkuk 2:6, okay, hello elechulam alav mashal yisau umelitzachidot lo v'yomar hoy hamarbe lo ad matai umachbir alav avtit. He said, they shall say, oh, you who pile up what is not yours, how much longer, and make ever heavier your load of indebtedness. Okay. And it says, its interpretation concerns the wicked priest who is called by the name of the truth. Now, and we actually have to go back a little bit because it talks about someone who is shall define, go unpunished, the treacherous, the arrogant. We're talking about someone who's arrogant but isn't getting punished, right? Its interpretation concerns the wicked priest who was called by the name of truth at the beginning of his standing, but when he ruled in Israel, he became arrogant and he abandoned God and betrayed the statutes for the sake of wealth. Okay, so here he stole and amassed the wealth of the men of violence who had rebelled against God, and he took the wealth of peoples to add to himself guilt of iniquity. In other words, here's a ruler. Again, this is the idea that this is a Hasmonean ruler, that in the beginning they were hopeful that this was a good ruler. He was called by the name of truth at the beginning of his standing. And let's look at here. Nikra al Shem ha'emet b'tchilat omdo, right? He was called by name of the truth when he began to his standing. So this person that originally they were hopeful that he was going to be a good king, one assumes, or a good ruler but then he actually became arrogant. And possibly when he the kasher mashal b'Yisrael, could be that before he rose to the kingship, they had great hopes of him, but then when he actually became king, he was too haughty, okay, and he stole and he amassed the wealth of everyone essentially. So, and then and again we continue on about how terrible this guy is. He rebelled and transgressed the statutes of God, and all his enemies will arise and abuse him, right? So this interpretation of Habakkuk, where actually it sounds like probably well, I mean, there are different ways to interpret it actually, but it's talking about the wicked, and because you've plundered many nations, it's not clear is this Babylon or not. You will also be despoiled of by many nations. Instead, this is all about the wicked priest. Moving right along, let's continue on to and again it's talking about how the last priests of Jerusalem amassed wealth and profit, and so their booty will be given into the hand of the army of the Kittim. The Romans are going to conquer and take booty from these wicked priests. Now it's talking about all the priests of Jerusalem. Okay, so it's actually predicting the Romans are going to take over and kind of wreak revenge on these priests.
It's generally established that what they're referring to one of the Hasmonean kings?
I am sure that you can find arguments about it, but I'm going with Bill Anitzan's interpretation, and it actually makes sense, particularly given what they said about his rule. It sounds like they're talking, when they talk about the wicked priest, it sounds like they're talking about someone who ruled over Israel. So like they say specifically, when he began to rule, that is when he went back. He became haughty. And it sounds like that means he must be a Hasmonean king, because that would be someone who would be both priest and king.
So it'd be either like Yochanan Horkanus or Alexander Yanai, most likely.
Right. And that would work also with them having these like hopes for it, because like in Miksed Maseh Torah, they're writing and saying, oh, we know you're a good king. You should just realize what the right law is. So you could understand that they had high hopes, and then those hopes crashed. Now let me find the.
I mean, they seem to be painting the Prushim as the arch enemies, but certainly Alexander Yanai was hated by the Prushim as well. So,
well, again, they've got a lot of enemies in these passages. So I don't think they necessarily said the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? They've got different enemies. So, and the fact is, because it wasn't true, because in fact, these people were their enemies. Like anyone who, and let's continue on. Let's actually see what I'm talking about.
I just want to ask, there is one in Qumran, there's a verse, Tfilah L'Shlom Yonatan, which I think is interpreted as relating to Alexander Yanai, right? Like, does that mean that this king is probably not Alexander Yanai?
No, because in general, it's explained. They think that in the beginning of the reign of Alexander Yanai, they had high hopes for him, and then those hopes were crushed, I believe is what people think. So, and that would work actually with what they're saying here, that like he was his name was of truth, but then when he ruled, he became like bad and haughty. Notice here, so for example, here the interpretation of the passage concerns the spouter of the lie. The spouter of the lie is the head of the Prushim, probably, as opposed to the wicked priest. They've got all these different enemies, in other words. So if we go, I'm trying to find where I want. Here we are. Now here, this is one of the more interesting passages of Pesher Habakkuk. If we go into, let me go in Habakkuk itself. It should, here we are. So this is, you see, 2:15. Bet Tedvav. Hoy mashkere ehu misaper chamatcha v'af shaker leman habit al ma'orehem. Oh, you who make others drink, drink as you pour out your wrath, and you even make them drunk so that you can look at their nakedness. All right. Now, in general, in biblical prophecy, drinking is always bad. You're either drinking poison or you're drinking to get drunk. Drinking's always bad. You never want to drink the cup. You don't want anyone else to make you drink the cup. It's always bad. Okay. So here it's explicitly bad. And the way they interpret it, what's interesting is, so they say, woe to him who gives his neighbor to drink. Let me find the verse in Hebrew. Hoy mashkere ehu misaper chamato af shaker leman habet el moadehem. Okay, note the difference. This was to look at al meorehem, to look at their nakedness. The verse has changed to look at their appointed times at their holidays. Okay. So the question is, did they actually have a version like this? Or did they change it so they could have this interpretation? What is their interpretation? Its interpretation concerns the wicked priest who pursued the teacher of righteousness to destroy him with his poisonous vexation, be'ika'as chamato, right? With the anger of his wrath, right? To his house of exile, and at the festival time, during the repose of the Day of Atonement, he appeared to them to destroy them and to make them stumble on the fast day, their restful Shabbat. What is going on? What is going on? Let's go back to the verse. He's giving his neighbor to drink. When on Yom Kippur. All right. Hishro al kohen harasha asher radaf achar moreh hatzedek leval'o bekas chamato avot galuto ubeketz moed minuchat yom kippurim hofiel lehem leval'am u'kishulam biyom tzom Shabbat minuchatam. Right? What was he trying to do? He went on Yom Kippur to try and make them drink on Yom Kippur. Why? Biyom Tzom Shabbat Minuchatam, on the day of the fast of the Shabbat of their rest, right? And let's continue on. And actually, let's stop here because the rest of it is more figurative. So what's going on? Because at Qumran they are keeping a different calendar. Their Yom Kippur is not the standard Yom Kippur. And whoever the wicked priest is, he was like, this is not going to go. You guys can't keep Yom Kippur on this day. This is wrong. You got to eat and drink. And they're like, no. No way, buddy. It's Yom Kippur. We're not drinking. Okay. So this actually, there's a lot you can learn from this. One of the things that's most interesting to me, and this is assuming that we believe them, right? But I don't have a particular reason not to believe that this happened, right? They're interpreting something to say that's what Habakkuk was talking about here, that time when he did this, right? So what it means, what's interesting to me also, it means that, remember, even assuming Qumran, if the Qumran community was living at Qumran, which is a question, we don't know exactly where they were living at any given time, right? If they were living at Qumran at that time, it wasn't that far from Jerusalem. It was not considered particularly far from Jerusalem. And it was close enough and enough of a problem that someone was sent, whether the priest went himself or not, or he sent someone, because it was not acceptable for them to keep a different Yom Kippur. Now, to me, what's interesting is that there's a lot of arguments about the Judaisms, right? Different types of Judaism that existed all at once. And I think that this at least is a testament that there was a certain orthodoxy that was expected, at least in Judea, at least close to Jerusalem. In other words, some people cared that everyone keep the same calendar, right? And they were willing to go out of their way to try and make sure that there were groups that weren't messing up the calendar to this extent. Were they successful? It sounds like not. In other words, it sounds like this community was able to stand on their own and not, in fact, drink on their Yom Kippur, right? So that's an interesting thing that we're seeing just from this Pesher.
Is there an implication here that somebody sent some kind of police force to Qumran or wherever in order to enforce?
This is what's interesting. So let's look at the text, because I don't want to just just say things on my own. It doesn't seem like what it's. Let's look at what it actually says, and we can all kind of try to interpret it together, because there's not. We don't see a lot in terms of what were they actually doing to make them. It says Kohen. What it sounds like, again, it sounds like it's specifically here. You see HaKohen HaRasha Asher Radaf Achar Moreh HaTzedek. I'll select it in the English as well. It's the wicked priest who pursued the teacher of righteousness. And it seems like, first of all, it seems like it was mainly between the two leaders, right? In other words, it looked like it was the wicked priest going after the teacher of righteousness to tell him, hey, buddy, this is not okay, right? But then we see, but it looks like he tried to destroy him to his house of exile. In other words, he's out of Jerusalem. He's away from the temple, the teacher of righteousness, and the wicked priest went to get him, right? And it's not clear, is this the same event or not, right? And at the festival time, so Uviket moed minuchat yom hakippurim hofia lehem leval'am uliksholam biyom som Shabbat minuchatam. And at the festival time, during this is a good translation. During the repose of the Day of Atonement, he appeared to them to destroy them and to make them stumble on the fast day, the restful Shabbat. So on the one hand, you have the wicked priest versus the teacher of righteousness, and on the other, you have an attempt to make it seems like the group as a whole should somehow break Yom Kippur. One assumes, because of the thing that to make them drink, one assumes that the idea was to make them drink and probably eat on Yom Kippur. It doesn't sound like, Hophia lehem, he appeared to them, right, to swallow them and to make them stumble. It doesn't sound like he succeeded. You could read it that he did. It doesn't sound like he succeeded. It sounds like he went on his way and he probably thought, like, if you just gave me this and you said, give me a based on this, tell me what you sounds like the most likely. I would say it sounds like he went there and he thought all he had to do was tell them, guys, no, you guys are wrong. This isn't Yom Kippur. Stop it. You're not allowed to do this. I'm telling you, you're not allowed to do this. Don't do this. And he thought maybe that would be enough, or he thought that he brought a force against their leader and he thought that would be enough. It doesn't sound like whatever it was enough, and it doesn't sound like he came in major force. It doesn't sound like he came and with a police force forcing food down their throats. It doesn't sound like that. It could have been, because like you could also read this that he did make them stumble. You can read it that he succeeded, right? I tend to read it that he didn't succeed.
Could you also interpret this? I mean, it seems like there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here, but one possible interpretation is that we're looking at the foundational story of the Qumran community. This is why they ran away from to the desert, because they were trying to force them to keep a Yom Kippur that they didn't.
But they had already run away. It says that he went to their leader in his place of exile, so they were already gone.
Yeah.
Right now, you could say, well, they were already gone because they were keeping a different calendar, and that's absolutely people say that, right? There's a very good article that argues, I've mentioned this before, that says that when you know what, I really want to find it. Give me a moment. But touch the law and the sect will split. Right. That is the article. But touch the law and the sect will split. That's by Al Baumgarten. Legal dispute is the cause of sectarian schism. And there Al Baumgarten argues against the idea, from what I remember, that he argues against the idea that they split as purely a matter of law and calendar, and he argues that rather it was the whole approach, that a sect splits because of an entire approach, that their whole approach was different because, and we've mentioned this before, for example, Rabbinites and Karaites did in fact marry each other in Cairo, and they managed to respect each other's holidays. They kept holidays on different days. Like you have you have a ketubah, at least one, I think more than one, where it says that each one of them is going to respect the other's holidays. So
when
you
exactly?
could do it.
When was this?
It was in Cairo. It's from the Cairo Knesset.
So we're looking at something like about 1,000 years ago.
Oh, it's not a historical. I'm not saying that it's historically at the same time. It's more of a I don't know, study of religion type argument, right? That if people really want to be in the same community, they can handle different holidays as hard as it is, right? Like the classic thing of like, well, Hillel and Shammai, they married each other, right? That meant they were part of the same nation. They were part of the same community. Marrying each other is the final proof that you're not completely different communities. And in fact, there were Karaites and Rabbinites who did that. Yeah.
Hillel and Shammai also murdered each other. At least
they only threatened. They threatened to murder each other. Did they actually? I think they just threatened to, sharp knife and like.
I think there's a case in the Talmud where there's an actual case of murder.
I didn't remember that one. I'll take your word for it though. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember the one where he stands by the door with a sword, like, no one's leaving. No one's leaving. It's all halacha now. I love that scene. But anyway, yes. So let's go back to the let's go back to this story about the about the priest coming down saying, you guys have to eat on Yom Kippur, or drink on probably drink on Yom Kippur. As Susan mentions here in her comment, it's reminiscent of Rabban Gamliel ordering Rabbi Yoshua to appear on Yom Kippur with his staff and money. It's tremendously reminiscent, really quite parallel to that story, because again, the whole argument between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua was about when is Yom Kippur, and they did a calculation differently, and he made Rabbi Yoshua break his Yom Kippur, and that was considered really mean. It was considered a bridge too far by everyone around, that what Rabban Gamliel had done to Rabbi Yoshua, right? So it was absolutely considered a power move. And this was a power move for the priest to come down and say, hey guys, this isn't Yom Kippur, right? You're gonna eat and drink. This is not acceptable. And again, you could read it two ways. I tend to read it that it did not work, right? Because he did not bring the full force of anything. And he probably thought, this is what I would expect, he probably thought it was enough for him, as one assumes, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, to come down and say, hey, guys, you think it's Yom Kippur, and I'm telling you that's wrong. It is not Yom Kippur, and you're not allowed to do this. And he probably thought that would be enough. Maybe he brought some force, but whatever, it sounds like it wasn't. So this is one of the classic cases. It's also a classic case where, again, you have Pesher Habakkuk is quoting something, but it is it's misquoting it. And then, as always with these, we have the question of, was it misquoted on purpose, or did they have some other kind of source? Now, again, if we look at, and I'm going to end with this, because we're going to continue on with different Pesharim in future classes. If we look at here in Habakkuk again, let me find it. Here we are. Leman habit el meorehem, so he could look on their nakedness. Okay, and they're reading it as moadehem. So that's very, very close to this, because a resh and a daled look very, very similar, especially in certain scripts, especially in certain Qumran scripts. That resh and daled are very easy to switch. It's very possible that they had a copy where this was written without the vav there. So it could have just been written they could have just read it mo'adehem, as long as the resh looked like a daled. It would have been very easy to read it that way, right? So it's a question of, did they want to read it that way? Did they have a version that they really thought read that way? And that is important, because when we're talking about biblical interpretation and how important it was in the Qumran community to keep the verses kind of pristine and not mess with them. Right? Now, we absolutely see that in many cases, they really did try to not mess with verses, right? The one thing that they really do in general is, again, they're very careful about writing the tetragrammaton. They're very careful writing like the Yud-Kei, Vav-Kei, the four-letter name of God, and say they will frequently downgrade it to Aleph Lamed, right? So you'll see that. And we'll keep talking about the different ways that they use this to interpret. But this is, but I think I just want to, before we conclude, I want to point out kind of some of the things that we saw, even though briefly. We saw that what they're doing is they're taking certain words and they're saying this symbolizes something else. Okay, so it's this, if it's symbolizing different people, it's symbolizing specific people, it's symbolizing different events. When you're talking about so that the person should read it quickly, that reader is someone specific, is the teacher of righteousness, right? The wicked are not just the wicked, it's the wicked priest, it's the people who are betraying the community. and at the same time, it absolutely does interpret specific words in the verse. It's looking at, oh, it's someone who made someone drink to reveal, to see their nakedness, but not their nakedness, their holiday. That is the person who wanted to make us drink on Yom Kippur. So there is absolutely a very close attention to the words in the verse, at the same time as these words become symbolic of other things, right? And again, this idea that this prophecy is talking about us. Not only is it talking about us, but people need to believe our leader, the Kohen, who is not necessarily the same as the teacher of righteousness, but maybe is, who is interpreting these prophetic verses. About the end time, you are supposed to believe them. They know, right? And that takes us back to something that was mentioned last week in terms of what is prophecy. They will never call this prophecy. They will never call the teacher's interpretation, the Pesher, as prophecy, but it kind of is, right? Because they're interpreting here. We saw mostly interpretation about what has happened already, or more general things about the eschatological future. But there are several Pesharim that really talk a lot more about what will happen in the future, and that is considered to be an interpretation, and they're not going to call it prophecy, even though it kind of is. Yeah.
Sorry, but I think that the Pesher is not exactly prophecy. Like Habakkuk did the prophecy, they're just explaining what he prophesied.
Right. So what I'm saying is, yes, and they will always call it that, even when that interpretation is, and this is what's going to happen. Now, you are right that sort of interpretation happens all the time. So like you'll absolutely have medieval exegetes saying, oh, this is going to, I made the calculation and it's going to be at such and such a time. And then, and this is what it's talking about, I don't know, Christianity or Islam or whatever it is. And this is what's going to happen. But for the community, there's almost no limit to what they can say in terms of, well, this is symbolizing what's going to happen in the future. And now you have to believe it. Like that's what we had in what we read together in Habakkuk, that part of being one of the bad guys is that you don't believe what the priest got from God about what the meaning of these verses is. Like that's how they describe it. So let me find the verse, because I see you don't believe me. But it's let me see let me find the verse I'm referring to. We read it together. Hold on just a moment. Asher lo ya'aminu b'shom'am et kol habrit asher yishma dor ha'acharon mipi ha'kohen asher natan el bnei Yisrael Torah lifshor et kol divrei avadav ha'nevi'im. So it's they are the ruthless ones of the covenant who will not believe when they hear all that is going to come upon the last generation from the mouth of the priest, to whom God gave into his heart insight to interpret all the words of his servants, the prophets. In other words, the Pesher itself was given by God to the priest who is the leader of the community. And you have to believe it, right? That's part of what you have to believe. You not believing it means that you are breaking the covenant. So this is speaking in language. It's very much like prophecy. God gave this to you. Now you could read Elas too, Natan El Bnei Israel, right? But Bnei Israel here is reconstructed. I'm just reading Asher Natan El that God gave, right? And that is what you expect it to be saying, right? So God gave this interpretation to our leader. And that's normally the way you would talk about prophecy. But they're not calling it prophecy, Ido, like you didn't call it a prophecy, so that we have an out. It's not prophecy, right? It's interpretation. And yet God gave it to the priest, and you have to believe it. So again, it's got these tones of prophecy, but it's not called prophecy, right? And that's one of those things where Again, we have an out because there's no more prophecy. Like they would not say, the Qumran community would not say, they do not say that prophecy still exists. The prophecies were given, but the interpretation is also revelatory. So,
there's no prophecy because of Malachi.
I think that there's, I mean, I don't think they ever say that, right? And I think, and you know that I have a whole theory about that. At a certain point, prophecy is no longer considered. It's just there's just an understanding that prophecy is over. That if someone starts saying I'm a prophet, you are going to doubt him. That he must be a false prophet. Right?
We know this in Chazal, but is this also in the Qumran?
Okay, so yeah, so what we know in Qumran is that when they use the terms of prophecies, they usually say false prophets. They'll say they are false prophets. That's when they use the term of prophecy of like contemporary prophecy. When they talk about contemporary prophecy, it's always in the framework of being false prophecy, and it's not just at Qumran. In general, in Second Temple text, not always, but almost always, when you read it in Second Temple text, it's in the context of either being false or being very doubtful. Like, even like, and I always give this example, even like Nehemiah, when Nehemiah says, "Oh, this prophet told me to hide in the temple," and I was like, "You are a liar, and you are trying to get me in trouble," right? Because, and even though he calls him a prophet, he calls this guy a prophet, and this understanding that just because someone's calling themselves a prophet doesn't mean you're going to believe them. And then, and once you get to Qumran, it seems like they're pretty they're acting like there's no more prophecy, right? They're acting like at least you can't use the term prophecy. Now it's interesting because Josephus says about the Essenes that they're prophets, that there's prophecy there, right? So that's kind of this interesting thing that he talks about, specific Essenes who can do prophecy. So it's a little weird, but we can talk. I'm happy to talk about this again later. This is something that I've thought myself that I kind of want to write up a whole thing about, like, the end of prophecy, what happens in the Second Temple period.
Doesn't there seem to be some kind of implication in the Qumran community that they're treating their own leader as something of a prophet?
Right. Well, that's there's absolutely that implication, but they're not calling him a prophet. And that calling him a prophet has meaning, right? Words have meaning, and they're avoiding the word, right? They're avoiding the word prophet. That's all I'm saying, right? I'm saying that, and this is something that Alex Jason wrote a book about, right? He wrote a book about all the ways they're doing things that are similar to prophecy, right? And yet they're not calling it prophecy, right? That's not what they're calling it. And I think it's because conceptually, prophecy has been put in doubt. You no longer, the tendency is, if someone says they're a prophet, the tendency is to doubt them rather than to believe them. And I think that shift happened sometime in the Persian period, probably, or towards the end of the Persian period, perhaps. And that since that shift, one would not want to call themselves a prophet. Look, and you have that already in Zechariah, for example. We're talking in the future, people are going to deny that they're doing prophecy. Right? And admit to shameful things just to say they're not doing prophecy.
So, and that shift, if you say it took place in the later Persian period, is retroactive.
I don't think it was an absolute shift. I don't think it happened like that's it, and no one was going around saying they're a prophet. We know that people were going around saying they were prophets. I think that the burden of proof became on the person saying he was a prophet, where people automatically doubted them, as opposed to beforehand, where the burden of proof was on the person who was denying the prophet, right?
But whenever the decision came, even if it was gradual, it acted retroactively to say that all these people up until just immediately after the Shivat Zion.
I think that was only retroactive because you had certain people who were accepted to be prophets. In other words, Zechariah, of course, is a prophet. So because of that, retroactively, where are we going to draw the line? We'll have to draw the line after the last one that we are sure of, kind of thing. I don't think that it was such a, oh yeah, everyone besides Zechariah is going to, like, it was just like, okay, we know that there's no more prophecy. When do you think it ended? Well, it must have ended with Zechariah, right? Rather, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. It must have ended with them because they were the last ones, right? I think it was much more just like that, where everyone knew prophecy had ended. And then if you're gonna ask someone, well, when did it end exactly, right? Because I think that in general they weren't thinking in terms of exact, right? But there's a general idea that there is no more prophecy once you're out of the Persian period, right? Because, like, again, I mean, it's interesting because I was talking with a professor in this area, and he was arguing that one of the differences is whether you think Alexander changed the world or not, and that people in Judea, from the point of view of people in Judea, the conquest of Alexander changed the world. Everything is different now, as opposed to people in the diaspora who didn't have that same feeling of the world has changed, and that's why there's a different cutoff point for the canon, the biblical canon, which is an interesting idea. I have to think about it. So you're muted. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Is it
Go ahead.
possible that I heard, either I read in Racheli or heard her saying that Qumran, like, the sect thought that they still have prophecy?
You could have heard Rachel or say any number of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I also doubt a lot of what she said. But,
yeah. But I think maybe if she said that, what she means is that they were doing things that were like prophecy, because they seem to be talking about revelation, like they seem to believe in some kind of continuous revelation. So if you want to interpret that as prophecy, which normally we would, then sure, they're just not calling it that. That's. Thank you everyone for joining me. I will see you in 2 weeks. Next week, we don't have class, and I will see you hopefully the week after that. So, and I believe we're going to continue on with Pesher Nachal. So, see you then, everyone.